Crecida. And this is what dinner with my family looked like. While my siblings cracked king crab claws and sipped Chardonnay, my mother slid a crust of bread and a lukewarm bottle of water in front of me, like I was a stray they'd reluctantly let in. My brother leaned close and said, "Water's enough for you." They laughed. But what they didn't know. The building they were sitting in. The restaurant? It was mine. And that night, I'd planned every detail, right down to the moment their delusion would come crashing down. It was exactly 7 o'clock when I pushed open the glass doors of Astra, the soft chime above the entrance cutting through the hum of jazz floating from the speakers. The restaurant smelled like lemon butter and seared shellfish, familiar, comforting, but tonight it didn't feel like mine. Not yet. I paused near the hostess stand, catching sight of my family already seated near the wide bay window. They hadn't noticed me. My brother Bryson was laughing too loud, his hand slicing through the air as he told one of his exaggerated stories. His wife, Leora, leaned close, nodding in admiration. My mother, Seraphine, sat perfectly poised in cream silk, her pearls gleaming under the warm light. "Good evening, ma'am," the hostess said politely. "Table 4. "They're my family," I interrupted with a small smile. "The party under Seraphine's name." Her eyebrows lifted in recognition. "Ah yes, table 12. Right this way." I followed her through the maze of white tablecloths, my heels silent on the dark wood floor. Every detail here was one I had chosen, the brass fixtures, the sea glass chandeliers, the delicate coral prints on the walls. I could still remember the meetings with designers, the late nights approving suppliers, the first time the chef tested the king crab recipe. Yet as I approached my family's table, it was as though I were a guest in someone else's world. "Cressida," my mother greeted, her tone polite, clipped. "You made it." Bryson didn't bother to stand. He just glanced at me, smirking. "Traffic's bad on Fridays, huh?" I set my purse down beside my chair, ignoring the jab. "Good to see everyone," I said, scanning the table. 2 of Bryson's kids were tapping at their tablets, the glow of the screens reflecting in their eyes. The waiter came by with menus, his name tag read Michael. He looked nervous, eyes darting between me and my family. I gave him a reassuring nod, but he hesitated as if waiting for some unspoken instruction. Mother waved him closer. "We'll have 2 bottles of Chardonnay and the seafood tower," she said, handing back the menu without a glance at me. "And for my daughter," she paused, turning toward me with a thin smile, "she'll just have water. She's always watching her figure." The waiter froze. "Ma'am?" "You heard me," she said lightly, then looked back down at her napkin. I felt every set of eyes at the nearby tables shift toward us. I forced a small laugh. "Actually." But before I could finish, Bryson leaned in, resting his elbows on the table. "Water's enough for you, isn't it, sis?" he said, grinning like it was a joke we all shared. His voice carried farther than he thought. The waiter placed a crust of bread and a bottle of sparkling water in front of me. My pulse drummed in my ears. I smiled at Michael, he looked apologetic, his jaw tight, and said softly, "It's fine." Except it wasn't. I tore a small piece of the bread, tasting the salt and bitterness of it. It was good bread. I had chosen the bakery myself. But tonight it might as well have been dust. Mother dabbed the corners of her mouth with her napkin. "Cressida, darling, you really should learn not to take things so personally. You've always been sensitive." I kept my eyes on the table. "Maybe that's because I feel things," I said evenly. Bryson chuckled. "Here we go. Philosophy with water." Their laughter blended with the clinking of glasses, the soft jazz, the quiet murmur of conversations around us. I wondered how many people were pretending not to notice what was happening. I had grown used to being invisible around them. It started when we were kids, Bryson the golden boy, Leora the perfect wife, Mother the queen of social perfection. And me? The extra. The one who always helped out, but was never invited to the main table. "Don't make that face," Seraphine said without looking up. "We're just teasing." Teasing. Right. That was what they called it when they forgot my birthday for the 3rd year in a row, or when Bryson accidentally excluded me from family photos because it would mess the symmetry. I lifted the bottle of water, pouring it into my glass with steady hands. "You know, Mom, I read something interesting today," I said, my tone light. "Apparently, people reveal the most about themselves when they're being kind." Bryson snorted. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Nothing, I replied, smiling faintly. Just small talk. The food arrived in waves, lobster tails glistening with butter, oysters arranged on crushed ice, the sweet scent of crab filling the air. The waiter hesitated again when he reached me. "Anything else for you, ma'am?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. "No, thank you," I said. "This will do." He nodded once, understanding passing between us that the others couldn't see. As they ate, I let my gaze wander over the restaurant, the glint of candlelight in glassware, the hum of quiet satisfaction. These were my people, my patrons. And yet none of them knew the truth. Bryson cracked open a claw and looked at me. "Still working that desk job?" he asked, mouth full. "Guess you never had the stomach for real business." I smiled faintly. "Something like that." Leora sipped her wine. "You should try being more like your brother. He's always been the ambitious one." "Ambition looks different on everyone," I said. Seraphine sighed. "Honestly, Cressida, it wouldn't hurt to be a little more grateful. We invited you, after all." Invited me. To my own restaurant. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. I folded the napkin neatly on my lap, took a slow breath, and reminded myself not to react. Not yet. The conversation carried on, light and cruel in equal measure. I smiled when expected, nodded when polite. Every comment was a familiar sting. And yet beneath the table, my phone vibrated once. I slid it into my hand, opening the Astra Staff app. The interface I had designed blinked to life, clear, efficient, silent. I typed a short message, "Stand by for directive." Across the room, Michael's smartwatch buzzed. His eyes flicked toward me for half a second before he turned back to refill a glass. The smallest nod passed between us, invisible to everyone else. I leaned back, feeling the faintest curve of satisfaction under my ribs. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't belong at this table, fine. I'd show them what ownership really meant. Bryson lifted his glass, raising a toast. "To family," he declared. "Even the ones who like to play pretend." I smiled sweetly, glass of water in hand. "To family," I echoed. "And to truth, because it always finds its way to the table." They didn't notice the change in my tone, or the way Michael's steps quickened as he moved toward the kitchen. But they would. Soon. Very soon. I placed my phone face down beside the untouched bread crust and looked around the table, memorizing their careless faces. I had been quiet for a long time. Too long. And tonight, that silence would finally end. I typed the message. "Now, let's see how they react when truth enters their luxury dinner." The screen dimmed as I slipped my phone face down beside the glass. The chatter around me never faltered. My family laughed and clinked their glasses, still cocooned in their little world of comfort and superiority. Nothing seemed to have changed, and that was exactly the point. Astra's soft jazz continued to float through the air, the brass notes curling like smoke between the tables. Michael, the waiter, adjusted his stance just slightly. He touched his earpiece, whispering a few words I couldn't catch. His movement was subtle, anyone else would have missed it, but to me, it was as clear as a signal flare. Bryson leaned back in his chair, his wine glass catching the light. "You know, Mom," he said, "some people never really grow up. Always stuck in the same small place, thinking life owes them something." I didn't look up, but I could feel the heat of his words aimed squarely at me. Seraphine let out a short laugh, elegant and sharp. "Don't be cruel, Bryson," she said, though her tone carried no reprimand. "Your sister means well. She just hasn't learned how the world works." That line again. Hasn't learned. As though my life had been one long, unfinished lesson they were tired of teaching. I smiled, eyes fixed on the condensation sliding down my glass. Maybe I just learned different things. "Like what?" Bryson challenged. "Patience." He snorted, and his wife Leora chuckled politely beside him. Even the kids looked up from their screens long enough to share in the mockery, their laughter soft but pointed. Michael reappeared, refilling their glasses, moving with deliberate calm. He didn't look at me this time, but I caught the faintest tightening of his jaw. Mother raised her own glass, her pearls glimmering under the lights. "Let's toast," she declared, voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "To family, to success, and to knowing one's place in the world." I let the words hang. The waiter beside us froze mid-step. Even the jazz seemed to quiet for a beat. My fingers tightened around the cool stem of my glass. I thought about how many times she'd said something like that, wrapped in silk and sweetness, but sharpened like a blade. I took a small sip of water, let the chill anchor me, and smiled faintly. To family, I said. And to those who make the world run while everyone else takes the credit. The corner of her mouth twitched. Always the poet. My brother smirked. Or the martyr. I didn't reply. Silence, I'd learned, was louder than argument. Michael returned again, this time holding the printed dinner menus for the evening's family celebration. He placed one before each guest, gold-trimmed, embossed, elegant. Except mine. He skipped me. It was deliberate, and I knew it wasn't his doing. My mother reached for the stack before he could offer one. Oh, don't worry about her, she said lightly. She's not technically one of the guests of honor. The guests of honor. I could feel the words echo in my chest, bouncing against every memory of being invisible. I glanced down the table at the menu in front of Bryson. The words Family Appreciation Dinner gleamed in golden ink. Underneath, a note read, hosted by Seraphine and Bryson Cole. Not even a mention of me. Of course not. I forced my expression to remain neutral, but inside, something small and hard began to shift. A flash of memory surfaced, my 10th birthday. A sheet cake frosted in white, pink candles flickering. My mother had gathered her friends around, smiling wide for the camera. I'd leaned over the table, ready to blow out the candles, only to realize the cake said Happy Birthday Bryson. They'd laughed it off. A bakery mistake, they said. But when I asked if they'd ever fixed it, Mother had just patted my head. Don't be dramatic, she told me. It's just a name. Names matter. The hum of the restaurant returned. I breathed slowly, steadying my heartbeat. Across the room, Michael caught my eye for a fraction of a second, his hand brushed the earpiece again, and then he nodded toward the far corner, where my partner, also named Michael Kearns, had just entered. He moved like he always did, quietly assessing the room, the posture of the staff, the pacing of service. His presence was invisible to most diners. To me, he was the quiet force that had built this place from sketches on a napkin into what it was now. He didn't approach the table yet. Instead, he checked something on his phone, spoke briefly to the maitre d', and continued toward the back. Seraphine took another sip of wine. This place is nice, she said casually. But it's not quite as refined as Bryson's club. Still, they try. I turned to her, voice calm. I'm sure they do. Bryson grinned. You should come by the club sometime, sis. Real class there. No offense, but this crowd's a little touristy. No offense taken, I said, keeping my tone smooth. I've always liked real people. He frowned, unsure if it was an insult. Mother changed the subject before he could respond, launching into a story about her charity luncheon and how everyone important had attended. I nodded along, letting her words blur. My gaze shifted again toward the kitchen entrance, where I saw one of my senior chefs pass a small folded note to a server. The choreography had begun, simple, invisible, elegant. I glanced at my reflection in the polished silverware. Calm, poised, unbothered. On the surface, I was the same woman they'd always underestimated. But inside, the tide was turning. Leora leaned closer, lowering her voice. You really don't mind, do you? About the water and bread? Mom just worries about appearances, you know. Of course, I said softly. Appearances are everything. Her smile faltered. For the first time that evening, she seemed unsure. Bryson signaled for another bottle of wine. When the waiter poured, he caught my eye again, Michael, loyal and silent. Every move was in sync. I thought about all the mornings I'd walked these halls before sunrise, watching the staff polish glassware, inspecting deliveries, tasting sauces. Every corner of Astra held a fingerprint of my effort, every detail the result of choices they would never acknowledge. And now, they were sitting here, oblivious, enjoying what they thought was theirs to mock. I took a slow breath, feeling my pulse even out. The urge to react had passed. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to prove anything to them. Not with words. Bryson's laughter broke through again, too loud, too certain. You always were the quiet one, he said, wagging a finger at me. Never could handle a little heat, huh? I smiled. You'd be surprised what I can handle. He raised an eyebrow but let it go. The conversation drifted to real estate, vacations, stock tips. I sat back, watching, listening. Every so often, one of the staff would glance my way, discreet, respectful, waiting. They didn't know the details, only that something significant was about to unfold. And for the first time that night, I let myself feel it, the shift in power. It was subtle, invisible to those at the table, but I could sense it like a current in the air. Seraphine reached for her glass again. Cressida, dear, you really should come to the next family event. Bryson's hosting a dinner for the city council members. You might learn something about how the real world works. I tilted my head slightly. You're right, I said, my voice calm, even. I think the world's about to teach all of us something. Her brows drew together, but before she could reply, Michael Kearns appeared near the entrance again, exchanging a few quiet words with the maitre d'. He looked up once, directly at me, and gave a brief nod. It was time. I turned my gaze back to the table, to my mother's perfect composure, to Bryson's self-satisfied grin, to the way they all seemed certain that this was their stage. They had no idea the script had already changed. Michael nodded in my direction. Time to shift the stage, and finally, flip the script. Michael's nod was brief, precise, deliberate. I felt it like a cue, an invisible hand turning the next page of the evening. The soft hum of the restaurant continued as though nothing had changed, but under the candlelight, the energy had shifted. It was subtle, like a faint change in the air pressure before a storm. I sat quietly, eyes on my family as they chatted and laughed, still oblivious. The servers moved a bit differently now, quicker, sharper, coordinated. They knew something was unfolding, even if they didn't yet know what. Bryson was halfway through a story about his latest real estate deal. I told the guy, he said, tapping his phone screen for emphasis, if you can't double your investment in 2 years, you're not serious about money. His tone was smug, his grin wide. Leora leaned close, brushing his arm. That's brilliant, babe. You always have the best instincts. Mother smiled proudly. You always did, dear. You remind me so much of your father. He could sell snow in Alaska. I pushed the bread crust around my plate, pretending to listen. But my mind wasn't there, it was somewhere else entirely, back in a memory that refused to stay buried. I must have been 16. The year Bryson graduated high school. They were planning a college tour, a family road trip up the East Coast. I'd spent weeks helping Mother organize it, printing itineraries, packing snacks, even cleaning out the van. I was certain I'd be going. But the night before they left, Seraphine came into my room. You'll stay home, sweetheart, she'd said, her tone sweet as syrup. Someone has to watch the house. You're so responsible. We'll bring you something from the trip. I remember standing at the window the next morning, watching them drive away. Bryson's music blasted from the car, their laughter fading down the street. I'd stood there until the sound disappeared, the silence afterward deafening. That was the first time I promised myself that one day, I'd matter. I'd build something no one could take from me. Something they couldn't pretend didn't exist. The memory faded, replaced by the present, the taste of lemon and salt in the air, the sound of laughter that didn't include me. I glanced around the restaurant again. It was full tonight, every table glowing with conversation, clinking glasses, comfort. My restaurant. My creation. Bryson turned his phone toward Mother, showing off photos of a modern building downtown. We just closed on this one last week, he said proudly. Going to turn it into condos. The city's practically begging for projects like this. How wonderful, Seraphine said. You're always moving forward. Not everyone can say the same. Her gaze flicked toward me as she said it, subtle, but sharp enough to draw blood. I smiled politely. True. Some people just prefer to build things that last. She didn't respond. Instead, she reached for another crab leg, snapping it open with a satisfying crack. Michael, she called to the waiter, make sure my daughter gets the leftover shells later. She likes to make those little. What do you call them, dear? Soups. The table laughed. Even the children giggled. I kept my face composed, though my jaw ached from holding back the words rising in my throat. I saw Michael, the waiter, pause mid-step. His eyes flicked toward me for confirmation. I gave a single nod, small, calm, decisive. He moved on, no hesitation. The laughter faded around me, replaced by a low hum in my chest, the sound of quiet determination. I'd played this part for years. The polite daughter. The quiet sister. The invisible one. But invisibility has power when you learn to use it. Bryson leaned across the table, wiping his hands with a napkin. You know, Cressida, you could have done more with your life, he said, as though offering advice. You're smart enough, sure, but you always played small. You let the world pass you by. I turned to him, calm as still water. I didn't play small, Bryson. I played smart. He blinked, caught off guard. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled. You'll see. The waiter returned to the table, refilling glasses. When he reached me, I spoke softly, barely above a whisper. Bring out the reserve bottle for table 4. His hand froze for a second, then he nodded. Of course. Mother frowned. Reserve bottle? What's that? I shrugged lightly. You'll see. The waiter walked briskly toward the back. Across the room, I saw Michael Kearns intercept him, listening for a moment before giving a curt nod. Then, a quiet murmur rippled through the staff, barely noticeable to anyone else, but unmistakable to me. The orchestra of truth was tuning its instruments. Seraphine dabbed her lips with her napkin. Cressida, dear, don't start something dramatic. This is a family dinner. Of course, I said sweetly. And I'm just the extra, remember? Extras don't start scenes. Bryson chuckled. You said it, not us. Leora glanced between us, her smile tight. Let's not ruin the evening. The food's wonderful, isn't it? Yes, I said softly. It's perfect. I watched as the waiter disappeared into the wine cellar. My heart wasn't racing, it was steady. Controlled. Every move tonight was part of a rhythm I had set months ago, in preparation for a moment just like this. I remembered how it all began, the countless nights working late, the meetings with investors, the endless rejections. Nobody believed Astra would survive. Even my family had mocked the idea. A restaurant? In this economy? Bryson had laughed. You'll be bankrupt before dessert. But I'd done it. Quietly. Thoroughly. Alone. The waiter returned, carrying a dark green bottle cradled in a linen cloth. The label was familiar, it should be, since I'd chosen it myself, a 1989 vintage from Napa, the year I was born. Rare, exquisite, saved for only the most significant occasions. He set it on the table, and for a moment, the candlelight caught the deep color of the glass. Bryson leaned in, curious. What's this? You finally decided to drink something real. Something like that, I said. Seraphine's tone turned sharp. Cressida, this is unnecessary. That wine costs more than your monthly rent. I looked at her, letting the silence draw out. You're right, I said softly. It's not unnecessary. It's long overdue. Bryson laughed, waving for the waiter. Fine, fine. Pour it, then. Let's see what the fuss is about. But the waiter didn't move. He looked at me first. Always at me. I gave a slow nod. He took the corkscrew, placed it carefully into the bottle's top, and began to turn. The sound filled the air, a soft, deliberate twist, the kind that draws attention without effort. Mother's voice broke the silence. Honestly, you've always had a flair for the dramatic. Maybe, I said. But sometimes drama is just truth trying to be heard. The cork lifted with a soft pop. For a second, no one spoke. Even Bryson's grin faltered, the laughter around the table dying mid-breath. The waiter stepped back, waiting for my cue. I picked up my glass, turning it slowly, watching the wine catch the light like liquid garnet. They didn't know it yet, but this was my moment. The first toast was about to be mine. The cork had popped, a soft echo that rolled through the room. I stayed seated for a few seconds longer, feeling the shift before anyone else did. The table went silent, forks hovered midair, conversation evaporated. The air itself seemed to pause. Then I rose. Calmly. I picked up my glass, the dark red catching the candlelight like fire caught in crystal. Before dessert, I said, smiling gently, I'd like to make a small toast. Bryson leaned back in his chair, grin wide. Well, this should be good. Mother's lips curled in polite confusion. A toast? That's unexpected. Yes, I said softly. Unexpected seems fitting tonight. I lifted my glass, my voice even. To family gatherings, I began, my tone warm and steady, to shared memories, to the things that bring us together, even when we don't always see eye to eye. A few chuckles around the table. Harmless, polite. Just another pleasantry, at least for now. I was thinking earlier, I continued, about how every family investment looks different. Some take longer to mature. Some surprise you in the end. Bryson's laugh faltered. He frowned slightly, glancing at Mother. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing complicated, I said easily. Just that sometimes the smallest things we overlook grow into something remarkable. Seraphine gave a nervous little laugh. Cressida, dear, you always did love your metaphors. I smiled at her. I do. They keep the truth polite. Leora looked between us, the tension beginning to pulse under her painted calm. The children whispered, sensing something shifting that they couldn't name. I suppose, I went on, that's what life does. It takes the things we're left out of, the trips, the dinners, the invitations, and turns them into motivation. Mother stiffened. Bryson tried to interrupt, but I kept going, my tone never rising. To the ones who left me behind, I said clearly, I thank you for the silence. It taught me to build alone. For a long second, no one moved. The restaurant's hum faded in my ears until it was only their breathing, the uneasy shuffle of Bryson's hand tightening around his fork, the soft sound of Mother's pearls shifting against her collarbone. Seraphine laughed again, too quickly. Oh, come now. This is a joke, right? I looked her straight in the eyes. Not really. Bryson leaned forward, scowling. Cressida, if you're trying to make some kind of point. I cut him off smoothly. I'm not trying, Bryson. I'm making one. The sound of my voice surprised even me, controlled, low, anchored in something unshakable. I turned slightly toward the staff gathered along the periphery. And to the team here at Astra, I said, raising my glass again, for bringing my vision to life every night with grace and excellence. You've made this place more than a restaurant. You've made it a legacy. Mother blinked. Your vision, she repeated. Bryson gave a sharp laugh. Hold on, your what? What are you talking about? Before I could respond, Michael stepped forward from the side of the room. He was holding a clipboard, the one we kept in the kitchen for nightly operations. His stride was measured, quiet, professional. When he reached me, he offered the board without a word. I took it, turned it toward the table, and set it down beside the wine bottle. The signature at the bottom gleamed in blue ink, mine. Seraphine's fork clattered against her plate. Cressida, she said slowly, what is this? Bryson squinted, leaning closer. Is that? Yes, I said simply. It's ownership documentation. For Astra. Leora's hand flew to her mouth. You own this place? I smiled faintly. Not just own it. I built it. From the ground up. Every light fixture, every recipe, every paycheck signed. For the first time all night, Bryson was speechless. The color drained from his face, leaving only the faint flush of embarrassment. Seraphine recovered first, her voice cold and sharp. You're saying this restaurant belongs to you? I nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. She gave a tight, humorless laugh. Oh, darling, you've always had such an imagination. Michael stepped forward again. Mrs. Cole, he said politely, Miss Cressida is Astra's sole owner of record. She founded the business, hired the staff, and manages all operations. I can verify that. The table went silent again. Even the children had stopped moving, their wide eyes darting between faces. Bryson slammed his hand against the table. That's impossible. You don't have the money for something like this. I tilted my head. That's what you thought. And that's exactly why I didn't tell you. He started to speak again, but I raised my hand. Don't, I said gently. Not tonight. Tonight's about truth, not denial. Seraphine's voice was icy. You planned this. Not exactly, I said. But when you handed me that bread crust and bottle of water, I realized you deserved to know whose table you were really sitting at. Mother's face tightened, the elegant mask cracking around the edges. Bryson shook his head, trying to laugh it off. You're bluffing. This is some kind of performance. You've always been dramatic. I didn't reply. Instead, I glanced at Michael, who gave a small signal to the maitre d'. Within seconds, the background music shifted. The volume dipped lower. A spotlight, subtle, soft, illuminated our table. The restaurant's quiet rhythm continued, but there was no mistaking the focus now. I looked at Bryson again. You once told me water was enough for me, I said evenly. Funny thing about water, it finds its own level, no matter how many walls you build around it. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Seraphine's chin trembled. You've embarrassed us, she whispered. No, I said. I've reminded you that I exist. The waiter appeared again, silently refilling my glass. My mother's hand shook as she reached for hers. I lifted mine slightly. To family, I said softly. The ones who thought I was small, and the ones who'll now realize how big small can get. Bryson's jaw clenched. He looked like he might explode, but he didn't move. Leora avoided his eyes completely, her face pale. The wine tasted sharp, rich, and satisfying as I took a slow sip. The entire table had frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Across the room, one of the older patrons began to clap, softly at first, then more firmly. Another followed. Within seconds, the applause spread, polite but undeniable. Seraphine's lips parted in shock. What is this? She hissed. Recognition, I said simply. Something you never gave me. I turned slightly toward Michael, who stood a few steps behind me, expression steady. Thank you, I said. He inclined his head. Always, Miss Cole. I glanced back at my family. Enjoy the dessert, I said gently. It's on the house. Well, my house. Bryson stood so fast his chair screeched against the floor. His face was red now, anger replacing disbelief. You think this makes you better than us? I didn't flinch. No. It just makes me free. The murmurs around us grew louder, the tension stretching thin as glass. Bryson stood, disbelief on his face. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Bryson was already half out of his chair when the realization hit him, when he finally registered what I had said, what I had shown them. His face shifted from disbelief to anger, then to something meaner, sharper, more familiar. I didn't move. I simply sat there, wine glass in hand, calm as if I were waiting for the ocean tide to finish crashing. You've lost it, he said, laughing under his breath. Completely lost it. You think anyone believes this little act? Sit down, Bryson, Mother said quickly, her voice tight with embarrassment. You're making a scene. He ignored her. You're hallucinating your own success now, huh? His smirk widened. Always had a wild imagination, but this takes the cake. I leaned back slightly, my eyes steady on his. You're right about one thing, I said. I always had imagination. That's why I built something while you were still talking about building. His jaw twitched. He looked around, expecting the others to laugh with him, but no one did. Even Leora was staring at her plate. You're not serious, he scoffed. You, running a place like this? Please. You couldn't even keep a part-time job at that design firm. You cried for days when they fired you. The words hit like an echo from another life, but they didn't land the way he wanted. Yes, I said evenly. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Failure's funny that way, it teaches you how to build without applause. He snorted. You just got lucky. I reached into my bag, calm, deliberate, and pulled out a stack of papers. I didn't slam them down, didn't make a show of it. I just placed them quietly on the white tablecloth between the wine glasses and the silverware. Luck, I said softly, usually doesn't come with this much documentation. He frowned, glancing at the papers. His laughter faltered when he saw the embossed state seal, the business registration heading, the line that read Astra Dining Group LLC, sole managing partner, Cressida Cole. Feel free to read, I said, my tone as mild as if I were offering him dessert. He didn't touch them. His eyes darted to Mother instead. Seraphine's expression was unreadable, her fingers tightening around her napkin. You've had this all along? For years, I said. You just never asked. Or maybe you never thought it was worth asking. Bryson's voice cracked with forced laughter. Oh, come on, this is pathetic. You're parading paperwork like it means something. You think that makes you powerful? I tilted my head. No, Bryson. The paperwork just makes it official. The power came when I stopped needing your approval. The table fell silent. Even the clinking of glasses from nearby tables seemed to fade. I looked at Mother. I came here tonight to celebrate peace, I said quietly. But I won't drink poison to keep it. Her lips parted, a faint tremor breaking through her composure. Cressida, don't do this here. This is the only place it could happen, I replied. You chose the setting, remember? Bryson snorted again, but there was something nervous under the sound. What's your point, huh? You got lucky with one restaurant and suddenly you think you're above us? I set the papers aside and folded my hands. No, not above. Just done. Mother blinked. Done? Done pretending, I said. Done shrinking myself so you don't have to face how small your kindness really is. She swallowed, color rising in her cheeks. That's uncalled for. I leaned forward slightly, my voice still calm. No, what's uncalled for is humiliating someone at their own table. You've done it my whole life. Tonight, you did it in a place I built. Bryson rolled his eyes. God, you sound dramatic. Bryson. My voice cut through his. Quiet but sharp enough to make him stop. This is your warning. I'm not asking for respect anymore. I'm demanding it. And if I'm disrespected again, I won't just leave. I will respond. He blinked, stunned for half a second. You threatening me now? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence stretched across the table, taut and electric. The waitstaff pretended not to listen, but every ear in the room was tuned in. My niece, Bryson's eldest, looked at me from the end of the table, her young face filled with something between awe and fear. She whispered softly, Aunt Cressida? Ich smiled here, gently. It's okay, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need reminders about how to act. Bryson barked out a humorless laugh. You've really lost your mind. He grabbed his wine glass and drained it in one swallow, his face red. You're pathetic. You think anyone here cares that you own this, what, this glorified seafood joint? Leora whispered, Bryson, stop, but he didn't hear her, or didn't care to. You think success changes where you came from, he said, pointing at me with the glass. You'll always be the same lonely, jealous little girl who watched the rest of us actually live. The words should have hurt. But they didn't. Not anymore. I looked at him and felt something shift, not pity, not anger. Clarity. I'm not lonely, I said. And I'm not jealous. I just stopped mistaking cruelty for strength. He clapped slowly, mock applause that echoed in the stunned silence. Oh, that's good. Did you rehearse that one in front of a mirror? No, I said softly. I lived it. He grinned, leaning closer across the table. You brought paperwork to a family dinner, Cressida. You really think this makes you somebody? Michael, I said quietly. My business partner, who had been standing just beyond the edge of the dining floor, stepped closer. Yes, Miss Cole? I met his eyes, unflinching. Start the list. The words were simple, but everyone at the table felt them. Bryson's smile faltered. What list? Michael gave a curt nod and turned toward the kitchen. A quiet ripple began among the staff, servers exchanging glances, the maitre d' adjusting his tie. The gears of the restaurant began to turn, not in chaos, but in perfect, rehearsed order. I leaned back in my chair. You'll see. Seraphine's voice trembled slightly. Cressida, what are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago, I said. Setting boundaries. And consequences. Bryson scoffed, still trying to recover his confidence. Boundaries? Consequences? You sound like a corporate HR manual. I smiled faintly. No, Bryson. I sound like someone who finally understands her own worth. He opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of movement cut through the air, the staff re-entering the room, their composure impeccable. They weren't chaotic or aggressive, they were deliberate, united. For the first time all night, Bryson looked uneasy. You're insane, he said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe, I said quietly. But even insanity deserves respect. Michael stopped near my shoulder. It's ready, he said simply. I nodded once. Thank you. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, her fear blending with confusion. I didn't look at her. I kept my gaze on Bryson, steady, calm, unmoving. This dinner started as a performance, I said, my tone gentle. But I think it's time we rewrite who the audience really is. Michael nodded again. This time, the restaurant itself would respond, on my behalf. From the moment Michael nodded, the atmosphere in Astra shifted, almost imperceptibly, but I sensed it deep in my bones. The sound of talking guests, the gentle clink of silverware, the rustle of linens, all those familiar rhythms carried on, yet beneath them something new had begun. The restaurant was about to speak for me. At 8:35 p.m., the candlelight glowed warmer, the soft jazz undercut now with something cooler, the piano notes scribbling sharp lines through the air. I watched as the staff subtly shifted their choreography. The wine bottle at Bryson's end remained untouched longer, drinks weren't refilled. At the opposite end, at my half of the table, the service staff moved with quiet precision, plates arrived smoothly, the lighting seemed more intentional, the murmur of servers suspenseful rather than casual. My mother, Seraphine, spotted it first. Her eyebrow rose. "What's going on?" she said in a low voice, but loud enough that Bryson glanced upward. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, let the change in energy carry the weight. Then I raised my glass. "Since we're gathered here tonight," I said, voice clear, "I'd like us to recognize something." Bryson shifted in his seat, his grin faltering. "Oh, here we go again," he muttered. I ignored him. "You heard the toast," I said. "Some investments yield more than expected." I let the words hang gently, then added, "Mine did." His eyes flicked toward me, confusion mixing with something darker, annoyance? Fear? I couldn't tell yet. My voice remained calm. "You continued after the warning," I said. "So this isn't a dinner anymore. This is notice." Silence swallowed the table. Even the staff paused their movements for a heartbeat. Bryson laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Are you serious? A notice? What are you, some corporate CEO now?" I opened my bag slowly, reached inside, and drew out a leather-bound folder. I placed it on the table with deliberate care. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm the one who built this place from scratch. And tonight, you're sitting in a building I own." He scoffed, but there was no humor in it now. "You own this place?" he spat. "You? Rented booths and bought dreams, just stop embarrassing yourself." I leaned in. "Go ahead. Open it." He stared at the folder like it was a foreign object. I lifted the edge, revealed a page stamped with the state seal, Astra Dining Group LLC, sole managing member, Cressida Cole. "The restaurant's registration," I said quietly. "All documentation. All correct. Sole managing member. Not a gift, not an allowance. My effort. My risk. My reward." Mother's face drained of color. Leora gasped. Even the kids quieted. Bryson slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to bully us with paperwork? This belongs to the family, our name, our dinner." I nodded. "That's what I thought, too. Until I realized how comfortable you were with me being the background character. The one who didn't qualify for the crab dinner. The one whose name never appeared on the cake. The one sliding water and bread crusts while the rest ate king crab and drank to success." His face tightened. "When did this happen? How did you pull this off behind our backs?" "I learned," I said simply. "I learned that you don't need permission when you build your own table. I learned you don't need their applause when you earn your seat." I looked at Mother again. "And you, Mom, thank you. Really. You gave me the silence. I turned it into my blueprint." Her mouth opened and closed without sound. Bryson leaned in, voice low, dangerous. "You're insane. This is some revenge fantasy." I smiled softly. "No. It's confirmation. It's my business. By the way, I won't force you to leave tonight, though you may want to, because tonight you're my guests. But make no mistake, you've crossed the line. And this house will respond accordingly." At that moment, Michael walked forward carrying a framed document. The guests nearest us gasped. They recognized it as a deed, official, legal. The black frame contrasted with the white tablecloth. Bryson paled. Michael placed it beside the folder and stepped back. The writing was visible, original deed, Cressida Cole, owner. Underneath, in a faded pencil, someone had scratched out a name, Seraphine Cole. The room chilled. No one moved. Seraphine's lips trembled. "That's impossible." I stared at her gently. "You attempted to claim ownership years ago, through loopholes, legal maneuvers, verbal promises. You knew what I was building and still chose to marginalize me. Legally, you pushed. Tonight, you're exposed." Bryson finally spoke, voice shaky. "You're going to sue us?" I laughed, though it was soft. "This isn't just about suing. It's about setting the record straight. It's about claiming my space. If you sit at my table thinking you're in control, next time you'll find the chair gone." My niece looked at me with eyes loud in the candle glow. "Aunt Cressida," she whispered. I reached across the table and tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. "Thank you," I said, softly. "For watching. And for seeing." Bryson's anger finally broke free. He stood, chair scraping. "You're lying, this is a trick. You're trying to embarrass us in front of our peers." I rose slowly. "I promised you a warning. Consider this the summons." As the background music shifted, deeper horns, sharper piano chords, I knew the shift had completed. The restaurant walls, the service, the atmosphere, they were aligned. They were mine. Mother exhaled. "Why are you doing this at dinner?" "Because," I said, "this table is the stage where I was invisible. And tonight, I take the spotlight." Bryson glared. No words came. Leora's breath caught. The other diners near us sensed the tension and stirred quietly. Michael leaned in. "Everything's in place," he said just above a whisper. I glanced around at the staff positioned elegantly. "Thank you," I said. "Now we begin." The silence was thick, heavy, loaded. A full restaurant secluded in the middle of the city, and yet the world narrowed to this table. The past years of being unseen, of sliding into the background, of that crust of bread and water, it crystallized now into a moment of truth. I raised my glass again. "To clarity," I said. "And to the moment when the invisible becomes visible." Bryson's face contorted. "You've gone too far." I didn't respond. I drank. The candle flickered. The staff moved in perfect sync. The guests whispered. And I sat upright, owning my seat, owning this place, owning the moment. A hush settled across the dining room as the last notes of the jazz trio faded. I rose from my chair, feeling the weight of every eye upon me, not as the overlooked sister, but as the orchestrator of this evening. The candlelight flickered on the glassware and the shell-laden plates that surrounded us. I could read the shock in Bryson's face, the disbelief quickly morphing into something more combustible. "Really, Cressida?" Bryson's voice cut through the silence like shattered crystal. "You're doing this now, in front of God and everyone? You think you can just rewrite the rules mid-meal?" He slapped his napkin on the table. "You've been playing a long con, huh? Manipulating all of us, using the staff, twisting the truth." At that moment, I stopped being merely present, I became visible. I didn't speak for a beat. Instead, I let his accusation hang in the air, thick and hot. Then I leaned forward, voice steady. "When I was the one not invited, when you all sat upstairs in the lounge and laughed about the clients you were pursuing, yes, I was watching. I was building. While you told stories about projects, I made one of my own. So don't accuse me of manipulation, call it foresight." He rose so fast his chair scraped against the wood, wine staining the white cloth. "You're insane," he shouted. "You've lost touch with reality. You think owning some restaurant makes you better than us? Better than me?" His voice cracked. "Mom, your daughter here, she's acting like she's the queen of the castle now." My mother's face paled. Seraphine always tried to uphold the illusion of grace, but tonight the cracks were too wide. "Bryson," she exclaimed, voice trembling. "Stop it. You're embarrassing yourself." I stood, raising my glass, my posture firm. The restaurant paused with us, staff halted mid-serve, the murmur of other tables faded. "This isn't your stage anymore," I said with calm conviction. I turned slightly, glancing around at the other diners whose eyes now flickered toward our table. "You've all watched a family try to destroy one of its own. This isn't theater. This is truth." Suddenly, from the sound system, a soft voice began to play, scratchy at first, then clear enough, a recorded clip of Bryson speaking to my mother in the lobby earlier, his tone patronizing, his words about making sure Cressida doesn't get a foot in the door. The audio shifted, another voice, my mother's, saying, "She just doesn't fit the brand." Gasps rose in the room. A server discreetly wheeled in a small monitor, and on the screen images flickered, staff quietly exchanging glances, text messages to Michael about the family approval process, receipts from meetings Bryson claimed credit for, company minutes where my name was left off intentionally. The walls in the restaurant suddenly felt thinner. I looked at Bryson's face and saw the confident mask crumble. Seraphine pressed a hand to her mouth, teardrops forming at her lashes. The guests had stopped eating. Some of the older couples near us looked shocked, the younger guests whispered into their phones. This moment burned. "Surprise, isn't it?" I said softly. "You told me I didn't matter. You treated me like an extra, someone to be hidden behind the curtain. Well, the curtain's falling. Bryson stood as though struck. He tried to recover. You tricked us. You used this place for your own agenda. He pointed at me. Our name, our reputation, this is a family dinner, not some boardroom. I held his gaze. It is a family dinner. A dinner where one child got water and a bread crust while others ate king crab. A dinner where I wore a smile even though I felt invisible, because I believed I'd earned my seat. I paused. I earned it. Guests began to clap, slowly at first, then more firmly. A middle-aged man from a corner table raised his glass and nodded toward me. Well said, he said under his breath. My mother looked from him to me, realization dawning that the room had changed. Her voice cracked as she said, Cressida, please. I don't want your pity, I said. I don't want your apologies. I want acknowledgement. And I want you to understand, the next time you whisper about me, it will be recorded. And posted. And remembered. Bryson's face reddened. Leora looked away entirely. My niece, seated at Bryson's left, reached for my hand. I squeezed her fingers and she squeezed back. Quiet solidarity. One of the servers approached Bryson with a manila envelope. Mr. Cole, he said politely. Your copy of the complaint. He handed it across. Bryson's expression was blank as he accepted the envelope. In a polite bow, the staff member stepped back. The spectacle of the moment washed over him. Seraphine broke, her composed veneer shattered. Tears rolled freely. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought I was helping. She began to sob, her shoulders shaking while guests rotated away, some rising to leave, others watching in stunned silence. Bryson shoved his chair back and stormed toward the exit, but stopped short when the hostess gently blocked his path. I'm sorry, she said softly. Your reservation has been cancelled. Bryson's eyes flicked to me. What's this? He said harshly. This is crazy. You can't do this here. You already did, I said. And I will again. The restaurant's lighting shifted subtly, the wall sconces dimmed and a subtle tune of horns rolled out of the sound system. The room felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone who knew what it meant to climb from the margins to the main seat. I stepped back, letting the moment envelop the table. I saw a waiter deliver a final plate of dessert to a nearby couple, and the husband glanced at me, nodding. The irony made me smile, my place here was no longer secret, and they knew it. Bryson turned to leave, but not before locking eyes with me. This isn't over, he said. I raised my glass one more time. No. It's just beginning. And somewhere between the clink of metal and the soft murmur of stunned patrons, I realized justice sometimes echoes louder than pain. As we stepped out into the night, the pressure in the dining room still hummed. I guided Eileen through the bright foyer and through a quiet hallway behind the smart glass doors of the private dining room. The soft click of the door behind me sealed off the confrontation we had just lived through, and the door closed on who I used to be, the invisible sister, the extra seat at the table. Dinner's over. So is the illusion. I took a deep breath and walked Eileen toward a small lounge furnished with warm leather chairs and dark wood flooring. Her eyes were wide, scanning the muted lights and the hush, as if she recognized the magnitude of what had just happened, though the details may be fuzzy in a 20-year-old mind. I offered her a seat and handed her a water glass. You're safe here, I said. We'll only stay for a moment. She smiled, perhaps uncertain if safe was something we'd ever been. Thanks, Aunt Cressida, she whispered. I nodded, and turned back toward the main room. I paused in the doorway, looking through the glass at Bryson, Seraphine, the other guests. They were still seated. Some were leaving quietly, others simply stared, the hush like a blanket over the table. I felt a moment of somber power settle in me. The room belonged to me, more than it ever did to my brother. I stepped back into the room, adjusting the seam of my jacket. I confronted them directly. Dinner is over, I declared quietly but firmly. And so is the illusion. There was no screaming. No more playing small. Just a statement of reality that traveled across the table, echoing louder than any raised voice. Seraphine's lips parted. Cressida, please. You don't have to do this here. She attempted a soft posture. But I knew what it really was, a performance. Cameras had captured the moment, the hushed recording, the quiet nod from the staff, the monitors in the lobby. She was making an apology, but only under the light of the consequences. I saw right through it. It was what I call surface regret. You're right, I said. I don't have to do this here. But I will. I took a step closer. Because you treated me like an extra. You gave me crusts and water, symbolic gestures of exclusion. Tonight you sat at a table you thought was yours. But you were wrong. My voice didn't waver. I wrote the script. I own the theater. A murmur swept through the other guests. I looked at my brother. Bryson, you tried to make me invisible. You told people I was less. You told our mother I was less. You whispered behind my back that I didn't deserve, I wasn't ready, I'd always stay small. You lied. I let the word hang. And this, tonight, is your undoing. He rose to his feet, red-faced, but the camera phones in 3 different tabletops caught the moment. The audience wasn't just me anymore. The restaurant itself was the witness. A waiter brought him an envelope. He accepted it with trembling fingers. It's your lawsuit copy, the waiter said softly. The entire restaurant heard. I shifted my weight, calm. And you, Mom, I said, turning to Seraphine. You told me to hold the fort on that road trip because someone else had to shine. You said I was responsible for the van, that I was mature enough, but mature for what? For staying invisible? She shook her head, tears glistening. I thought I was helping, she whispered. You were helping someone else build their stage, I replied. I was helping myself build a life. The inheritance of Astra doesn't include you anymore. I removed you from access, removed you from decision-making. I rewrote the future. My final words hovered in the air, full of dignified power. The line between parent and partner, between collaborator and patronizer, had shifted. The old script was burned. Guests from surrounding tables watched with sober expressions. Some nodded toward me, others exchanged looks of shock. A few raised their glasses, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. A woman near the wine bar murmured, finally. Another man whispered, she deserves that. Michael stepped forward, holding a simple dish. I recognized it, a crust of bread and a small bottle of water, the exact match of the symbols I'd been given earlier in life. He placed the dish in front of me, and I looked at Eileen. Here, I said and set the plate gently before her. In my house, I smiled, turned to my guests mistakenly seated as family, you'll never be hungry. The truth landed. Bryson clenched his fists, Seraphine's sobs broke the polished veneer. It wasn't messy, it was real. A table reshaped. A legacy reclaimed. The clock hands nudged closer to 9:30 p.m., the staff resumed service for departing patrons, the hum of the room settled into a new frequency. I took one final look around the room I built, its corners, the ambient lighting, the soft jazz that resumed, but now it felt like home. My home. I reached out and took Eileen's hand. Let's go, I said quietly. We're done for tonight. Outside the room, the city lights glowed softly over the Charleston streets, welcoming in the cool evening air. The laughter I heard wasn't mine, but something in me responded to its warmth. I left the restaurant without a backward glance. The silhouette of the building receded behind me, but the certainty of it remained. I was no longer playing second fiddle in a tune I didn't compose. I was the conductor, the composer, the audience. And it felt good. The evening air was cool as I unlocked the door to my private kitchen at 6 o'clock. The hum of the city felt distant. Charleston lights twinkled through the window as if acknowledging a change I had already made. I closed the door, set down my keys, and exhaled the last vestiges of tension from the dinner. I had walked away from the table that night, but the truth I planted there had settled in the soil of expectation. Inside, I paused in the doorway of the kitchen. The stainless steel counters gleamed under soft lighting. A single loaf of freshly baked bread warmed on the rack, the smell of butter and salt hanging in the air. The subtle aroma reminded me of the bread crust and bottle of water I'd been offered years ago. Only this time, the bread was mine, and the table I'd sit at was built by me. I glanced at the clock, 6:05 p.m. Time to settle into something deeper. Earlier that week I had marked an appointment on my calendar, nothing fancy, just a session with a therapist. I'd never done that before. At 6:10 p.m. I leaned back in my chair, replaying small moments, the overlooked birthday cake, the van trip I never took, the lunch meetings where I was just the sister. The memory of being set aside flickered, raw but softened by time. It happened in high school when my parents left for the tour and I stayed behind. My father's old voice, someone must stay and hold the fort, echoed now like a verdict I had fulfilled. At 6:20 p.m. I pulled out the legal documents from the drawer, the papers bearing my signature, the transfer of ownership of Astra, the clause establishing a foundation and scholarship fund. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper and thought, I'm rebuilding the future. Not just for me, but for those who had been treated like extras. My niece Eileen, the kids in the staff family, the one waitress who stayed when others left, they all mattered now. At 6:30 p.m. Eileen arrived. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her eyes curiously bright. "Aunt Cressida," she said softly, "it smells amazing." I handed her a chopping knife and said, "Want to help me prepare something simple tonight? Just bread and soup, nothing fancy." She nodded. As she stirred the soup in a copper pot, I explained, "We're going back to what matters. No claws of crab or shiny shells. Just something honest." She glanced at me. "I've always admired you." I paused, touched by how much had shifted. "Thank you," I said. "Tonight's about admitting the past, but building what comes next." At 6:45 p.m. I signed the final page of the transfer document. The scholarship foundation now bore my name, and the clause reserved part of Astra's profits for children of staff members, including Ashley, the waitress from the first dinner. My heart swelled. "It's official," I told Eileen, "but it means I don't need you to call me owner or boss. Just aunt and friend." She smiled. At 7 p.m. I placed the bread and soup on the table. The kitchen lights softened, the rest of the restaurant wasn't involved. The only seat set was mine and an extra for the memory. I raised a glass of still water. "To every extra who was actually the main character all along," I said, voice full of warmth and quiet resolve. I drank. The bread crust I broke and passed a piece to Eileen. She looked at me with admiration and something like wonder. Later, I walked into the dining room corridors, the quiet zones no longer used for confrontation, but for reflection. Guests from earlier glanced, gave nods of recognition. Several staff members caught my eye and offered soft smiles. Michael walked by with a cloth in his hand. "Well done," he said gently. I nodded. "Thank you." At 7:15 p.m. I stepped outside the building onto the sidewalk. The night air wrapped around me like a friend. I thought about the legacy I reclaimed and the seat I claimed, not a seat at an old table where I was once an afterthought, but the one I made for myself. And in that seat, there would always be room for others who had been forgotten. I looked at the empty chair pulled out beside the little table in the kitchen, symbolic, yes, but meaningful. I lifted my glass to the memory of that young sister who waited behind cars, who polished glassware when she should have been at the front table. I honored her by giving this seat away. One day, someone else would sit there. I didn't reclaim my place at the table, I built my own. And this time, no one goes hungry. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from those seated at your own table. What Cressida's journey teaches us is that dignity isn't something others can give, it's something you claim, even when surrounded by silence and scorn. Have you ever been treated like an outsider in your own family? What would you do if the power shifted to your hands? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful revenge stories that dig deep into the heart of betrayal, healing,